What is going on? Welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Outlet. I'm sitting down with a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the co-author of the amazing book, Worth Defending, which I have right here, Mr. Scott Burr. What is going on?
Hey man, not much. How are you?
Not a lot, man. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. And man, I've really enjoyed this book. I want to get into talking about this and, hearing about how you got into being a writer. And I especially want to hear about how jiu-jitsu has helped you become a better writer. But first, before we get into any of that, I want to ask you the question that I ask everyone to start off these interviews, which is, how has training in jiu-jitsu helped your mental health since you started training?
Okay. Interesting question. I think, let's see. One of the things that I think Jiu-Jitsu teaches us is to recognize patterns, and to take, responsibility for our participation in those patterns. And this is actually something that, we talk about a little bit in Worth Defending. So it's very common. One sort of, I think, constellation of mental health challenges that people face revolve around situations that are negative, right? They have sort of negative dances that they do in regards to certain types of situations or certain types of people, or even specific people in their lives. You have a tricky relationship with a parent. You have a tricky relationship with a boss. You have a tricky relationship, right? And these negatively impact our mental health. And it's, another part of that often has to do with the feeling that we don't have any power and we don't have any agency within those situations. And within that, that's a very, very low sort of mental health place to be in, right? Where you feel stuck in a situation that's negatively impacting your mental health, and you don't have any power you feel you don't have any power to change it. And so through the practice of jiu-jitsu, one of the things that we start to recognize is that when things consistently happen to us, right? Every time I go to do that thing, the guy manages to, he smashes me and he just mushes my legs together and he passes this one specific way. And we often think, well, how do I stop the guy? How do I stop the guy? How do I stop the guy? And we worry about the other guy. But the more we start to think, well, what am I doing that is creating this situation? What am I doing? Okay, I don't have any power over how strong this guy is or how fast he is, but I do have power over my own reactions, both emotionally, but also literally physically. And when we start to look at our own role as agents within our own experience, this is a fundamentally empowering position, for one thing, which is already, if we're dealing with feelings of disempowerment in our own life, that we feel like we're just being sort of blown about by circumstances, feeling that we do have, or recognizing the true impact we have on our situations. This can be a very positive shift. And then once we make that shift, it gives us, we start making decisions that create situations that will positively impact our mental health, right? I mean, obviously sort of one of maybe the predicating statements that I guess we'd have to make is that, in this culture, a lot of times we talk about mental health as though it's sort of some sort of independent phenomenon happening within the four walls of your skull. And I'm a big believer that the idea that we can somehow sever ourselves from our environment and have good mental health in a bad situation is not really recognizing how interwoven our own interior state is to our own exterior state. So a lot of times when we're talking about mental health, I think one of the things we want to talk about is shifting our actual circumstances. And so when we start to feel that we have a power and an agency within the situations that are occurring in our external circumstances, this does permeate through sort of the membrane of our self into the circumstances of our internal circumstances. I think I said circumstance about 15 times in that statement, but
yeah, you're saying it kind of teaches you how to take agency within your own life and within your own situation to take control of the things that you can control.
Well, I think it teaches us that we do have agency within our own lives, and that a lot of times we surrender it. And because we surrender it, we don't recognize the ways in which, because feeling disempowered is right. It's a very unpleasant feeling. But when we recognize that not only are we capable of having an influence on our circumstances, we are having an influence on our circumstances all the time, whether that's by participating with them or allowing them to happen. And so, one of the, it's like that statement you hear sometimes, life isn't happening to you, life is responding to you, right? When you make that shift and you start to realize that it's not a question of starting to exert influence on my circumstances. I'm already exerting influence on my circumstances. I'm already making decisions about how I react to situations, or what situations I allow, or ways I allow myself to be treated. And when we recognize that we're already the decision maker, it gives us more of a sense that we can change the decision rather than start making a decision.
Yeah, it really does. You're stepping into being a cause in your environment instead of just always being affected by everything,
which I think can only have a net positive on your mental health, because it gives you, I mean, again, not only does feeling disempowered feel terrible, right? But once we take authority on influencing our environment into the ways we want it to be, those external circumstances can't help but raise our sort of emotional. I mean, if we're constantly being surrounded by negative emotional situations and we start shifting it, we say, I'm not going to participate in those negative emotional situations anymore, or I'm not going to participate in ways that make me feel bad. That I'm going to be proud of the way I acted in those. And you start walking away from those situations feeling proud of yourself, even if the situation is negative. It starts to shift your mental health. I've found, for myself at least.
Right. Yeah, you're able to kind of get some perspective on your problems.
Sure.
That's what it does for me anyway. It kind of puts things into perspective and shows me where I can have control, or I can have authority. So let me ask you this. Let's say there's someone listening to this and they're picking up kind of what you're putting down, but they just feel like they're in that situation where they just can't change their environment. Maybe they have some family issue. Maybe they have some illness. Like, I know a lot of people who feel very disempowered by a physical illness or a physical disability. Something that like that can feel so outside of your control. How do you approach those sorts of situations where it just feels like you're totally trapped by either an illness, or maybe your own body, or maybe you're kind of quote unquote trapped by your circumstances in some way? How do you deal with those sorts of situations?
Yeah. So certainly I would not presume to advise anybody or make light of anybody's problems by assuming that I know, oh, just do this and you're going to, your problems are minor enough that my passing hypothesizing about them are going to make some sort of insight. But I will say that one of the things that has been so instructive for me is getting to spend the time I've gotten to spend with Master Hickson in the past 6 years, and the way he has conveyed, the way he is relating to both the injuries and the physical limitations that he had been experiencing up to the recent years and through the recent years, but then also obviously the Parkinson's diagnosis that we all heard about. And the way he talks about those things is always in terms of, like jiu-jitsu, I often say, is the question is, what do I want? Where am I? And what can I do? Right? So what can I do is going to vary based on situation to situation. Physically, it's going to vary based on age. Technically it's going to vary based on knowledge. Circumstances, it's going to vary based on, how much power I have in this situation, how much, influence I actually have. If a tornado's coming, my ability to act against that is not the same as my ability to act against it if somebody's coming across a parking lot toward me, right? Those are two different kinds of obstacles or threats or things I need to deal with. But I think if you can make a realistic assessment of your own capacity and then if you can make a realistic assessment of the situation, of your own capacity for effect within it, and where you would like to go, you can start to solve the puzzle of how do I use the tools I have in the context I'm presented with to get toward the result that I want. So part of it has to do with figuring out a very realistic goal, okay? Not a pessimistic goal, not an optimistic goal, a realistic goal for what you would like. And then coming up with a realistic strategy based on the capacity you have, right? If you, it's like, this is a terribly glib sounding example, but like, my girlfriend, runs her own business, and she was one of these kids who always struggled with math in school. And so every time it comes to like the math side of it, she has all this, sort of like residual angst about it. And maybe even this feeling of like, I'm not sure that, maybe this is the stopping point for me, because everybody who really runs a business and succeeds, they're good at math. And you say like, look, this is not about however good or bad you are at math, it doesn't really matter. Okay. It's just a situation. It's just a fact. Okay. You're this much good at math, which means that for you need to budget 3 hours, once every quarter to try to figure out, to do the math or whatever. Whereas somebody else, maybe they don't have to, maybe they just get it. Does the fact that they just get it mean anything? No, it doesn't mean anything. It has nothing to do with you. You just need a strategy for who and what you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what the situation is. Okay. And so I think when you start to reframe your life like that, one thing about that is obviously it's very important to know, and this is something that we talk a lot about in Richard's book as well, that I thought was so profound when Richard and I were talking, when Richard was talking to me about it, was this idea that you can't negative your way to a positive. You can't say, I don't want this situation to be like this, and have that be a goal, something you pursue. You have to come up with what you do want the situation to be in order to start pursuing it. So the reframe, when you start to say what the goal is, what your capacity is, I think even within, to bring it back to Master Hickson, he looks at what he's trying to accomplish now, or this is what he's expressed to me. It's like, looks what he's trying to accomplish, looks at the tools he has. Okay, right? We all have the internet. We all have the ability to film material. We all have the ability to connect to a lot of people. So the way he shares his message now is not go teach a seminar to 300 people and roll through everybody in the room. The way he shares his message now fits his own physical capability and the tools that are at his disposal. Okay? So is that bad, or is that good, or is it too bad that he can't? It doesn't really matter. What matters is coming up with the best solution based on the circumstances, is based on the objectives. So, I kind of forget where we started, but, when people are struggling with these issues, I think that's maybe the frame that we want to, it's a useful frame to start to unpack the situation, within.
Yeah, it's kind of like decide where you can place your energy and then put your energy there and go forward from there and do kind of as much as you possibly can do. And there's always a solution. There's always a creative solution. And another thing that I've thought about a lot before is it requires you to get really good at asking for help, especially when you're trying to level up. Like going back to the example of the small business owner who's not good at math. I'm not very good at math and I have a small business. So like for me, I try to lean on other people. You know, this is when you can hire people. And, or in jiu-jitsu, if there's ever some part of your jiu-jitsu game that you feel like you're lacking in, you can go hire a coach, or you can take a private lesson from someone, or you can, just ask a buddy who's really good in that position and see what they would do. You know, like there's always these different options. And for me, that's asking other people for help is like the ultimate cheat code. You know, if I suck at something and you're really good, I can just say, hey man, what do you do from here? Like if you get stuck in this spot, what do you do? And you're like, oh man, I just do this, that, the other thing. And then suddenly I have a toolkit that I can utilize. So I think it's the same thing in a lot of different areas of life. Like when you learn how to really ask for help, it becomes a superpower, but it can help a lot. It can help a lot of times when you feel otherwise stuck. It's like, yeah, you're stuck because maybe you've reached your limit. But if you learn how to humble yourself and ask for help from someone else, then it can shift. That's at least been my situation, like when I'm in that state.
No, and I think the other thing about that I've sort of realized in the last maybe few years is that, like, when somebody asks me for help and I can be useful to them, that's a really good feeling. And I think most people feel that way. Most people like feeling helpful. And so there's often a hesitation. I think, you know, we commonly, when we say like, oh, you can ask for help, we talk about it in terms of the hesitation being that people don't want to appear weak, or they're hesitant to ask for help because then it makes them look incompetent. And the reality is, I think the hesitation for the vast majority of people has less to do with that than it does to do with the feeling of not wanting to be a burden, or not want to annoy somebody, or, you know, feeling like it's too much of an imposition. And I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine who just bought a house, and she was really like, she was kind of going back and forth saying like, man, it's really intimidating. Like there's a lot of stuff I need to do, and I don't know how to do any of it. And I was like, I think you got to realize that, like, most people, especially when somebody does something like exciting and cool, like bought a house, like it's exciting for them. They want to be part of it. They want to be helpful, but they don't know how. They don't know what to do for you. And it's enough of an uncertainty to make them, you know, people say, oh, anything you need, just give me a call. But, you know, that's different than presuming to call a plumber, or it's different than presuming to come over and, you know, reframe your deck or something. So I say, when you give people the opportunity, when you give them a script for how they can be helpful, it's almost like turning the key, where they were standing on the other side wanting to get in. You were standing on the other side wanting to invite them in, but you got to open the door by saying like, hey, would you help me? Like, I got to move my dryer this weekend. I got to move it up 2 flights of stairs. Is there any way you could come help me? You know, I'll buy you dinner or something. Or even like, I think people are happy to be helpful. They just don't, they need to be given the script for how they can be helpful. And when they can, it's like most of the time they're psyched, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Yeah. I've had people like, okay, not to keep talking about my girlfriend, right? But she went to Paris couple of years ago, and it was like she'd never traveled internationally by herself, which is very intimidating, right? And one of the things I said to her before she got on the plane was like, look, 99.9% of people, if you ask them, like, I don't know where this train is. I don't know which platform I'm supposed to be on. not only will most people help you, they'll be happy to help you. So we have this narrative, I think, especially kids like, I don't know, I grew up in the 80s with like the stranger danger era where like everybody you didn't know was like going to put you in a panel van and drive you to a dungeon. But like the vast majority of people want to be helped. The world is full of people who want to be helpful. The people who want to take advantage of you and be a predator on you are the vast minority. Now, it's an interesting subtopic of the thing we do, which is teach self-defense based on the narrative that the world is full of predators, right? And there are definitely predators, right? But realistically, most people want to be helpful. And yeah, ask for help when you give them the opportunity to be helpful. That makes them feel good to be helpful, I think, most of the time, right? I mean, don't do it every week, but you know what I mean? Like, I'll help you move once.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing to learn how to do. And I think for people like us, it can be really hard to ask for help. But man, I had one other question I wanted to ask you about. So how has jiu-jitsu helped you in your career as a writer? That's something that I'm super interested to learn more about. And I've always wanted to write a book. I actually have like 5 or 6 that are in the works. So maybe one of these days, one of them will be finished. But just like, you give us any tips, from your vantage point, like how do the two arts kind of work together?
This is something that, so Chris Heauter and I are working on a book right now, and this is something that he and I talk about a lot in that book. There's a similarity in that art and martial arts are things that you practice in sort of an ongoing effort towards a perfect that you never really achieve. You as the vehicle, you are an imperfect vehicle for the expression of the vision, and that you have a limited amount of time with that imperfect vehicle for the expression of the thing. So you make your best attempt at expressing clearly the thing you're trying to express. And then you sort of, obviously with writing, you have a longer window. Jiu-jitsu, your athletic window is short. But the idea that the practice of the thing is the most important part, right? That whether you have a good day or a bad day on the mat, the next day you're on the mat. Whether you have a good day of writing or a bad day of writing, next day you're in front of the keyboard. And that, so I don't know whether I got that from jiu-jitsu and brought it to writing or vice versa. I mean, they're just the ways I've kind of approached both things from the beginning. And, I mean, I was in the martial arts before I was in another martial art before I started doing jiu-jitsu, and I was in that martial art before I started seriously trying to write. So I could say that probably from the martial arts, I got this idea that like the point is to show up and do the work. And I think I said in the last answer, the belts are nice mile markers along the way. The books you publish or the things you get published are nice mile markers along the way. But whether you get that belt, whether you get that book published, the next day you're back just doing it. Every day you're back doing it. And then I said specifically, I think the idea of efficiency is something that I have definitely, I don't know if I have taken it from jiu-jitsu, but I think maybe it's something that really appealed to me about jiu-jitsu, but it's definitely something that I see in both my writing and in jiu-jitsu, that idea that you're always trying to find the most direct and most efficient way to accomplish the thing you're trying to accomplish. And that wasted energy and wasted words and wasted time are sort of aesthetically unpleasing. And that you're looking for sort of the most direct effect possible.
It's amazing that jiu-jitsu has so much in common with life. It's almost like an allegory for all of life. And when you apply it to these different situations, it really opens up for you just how much there is inside of the martial arts. There's so many lessons that can be drawn from them. And there's so many different professions that they are similar to, if that makes sense. Like one of the last episodes that we did was with a lawyer, and he was had a lot to say about how jiu-jitsu and a law practice can go together. So I'm always really fascinated by hearing about this stuff, man. And I really appreciate you sharing this. I wanted to ask you one more thing. What was it like working on this book, Worth Defending, with Richard Bresler? For people that don't know, this is the story of the first person who ever began training jiu-jitsu with the Gracie family here in America. Richard Bresler is an OG. So this is a fantastic book. I really, really appreciate, yeah, I really appreciate you helping them make this book because it's a beautiful work. So I just love to hear a little bit more about that. Can you tell us about what was that creative process like, and what were some of your big takeaways from working on that story?
So, yeah, Richard's an incredible guy. Really, I feel really lucky to have gotten to work with him on this. I had been sort of, I knew kind of a lot of the sort of treetop level history that a lot of us know. So kind of, knew the origins of the UFC. I knew bits and bobs about Horian trying to establish jiu-jitsu in the 80s and the challenge matches. And I'd seen the videos we've all seen. But I had, I didn't have any real in-depth knowledge of that era. And so getting to go in and talk, sort of get sort of put right in the scene through Richard's experience, it was really fascinating. And, one of the things we talk about in the book is that I started doing jiu-jitsu in 2006, well post UFC. Most people training now came into it in the last, let's call it 20 years. And it's one of those things where whatever's around when you're a kid, you almost just take it for granted. You're just like, yeah, that's always been there. It was always going to be like that. And to really go back to, 1979, Horian's in the US, nobody cares about jiu-jitsu. Everybody thinks martial arts is kung fu. And if you're not kicking and punching, you're not doing real martial arts. And to realize that, like, it did not have to be like this. This was people dedicated their lives, Horian, all the brothers, and then Richard as well. Like, they put their shoulder to the wheel and they moved the ball forward, to utterly butcher and mix those metaphors, to try to make this thing what we all just get to take for granted now. That jiu-jitsu, there's a jiu-jitsu school in every town now. If I want to do jiu-jitsu, I can just go do it or not do it, right? But it wasn't always like that, and it definitely didn't have to become that. It definitely took, it took from 1979 until 1993, right? That's 14 years of concerted, consistent, dedicated effort in the face of people not caring and not wanting to know about your Brazilian karate, and not wanting to sign up, and not, even when you beat them in a challenge match, they go, well, that was, yeah, but really I'd still win in a fight. Like, to maintain that kind of faith, is such a remarkable thing. And I think that's one of the things that I think is so special about this story, is that you realize that this is really a story of the creation of something out of nothing, really. There was nothing here. And that it was Richard, and it was Horian, and it was the brothers. It was all these people who made that happen. And so on one level, it's given me this much deeper appreciation for the thing that I get to just take for granted and just enjoy. And that had grown to the point in 2006 that I could find a school in Cleveland, Ohio, that I could go train at. Right. It had spread that far eastward that I could just, like, go down the street and find a school. So it's given me that on one level. And then there are all kinds of parallels. And I talk about this a little bit in the foreword to the book. There are a lot of parallels between Richard's, or that I saw between Richard's experience and my own experience, just personally. And I don't know that I'm all that unique in that. I think one of the things that I found so compelling about Richard as a character was that he is so relatable. You know, so many of us are that bullied kid who just, they didn't feel like they mattered and they didn't feel like they had much worth. And through the practice of martial arts, they started to develop an appreciation for themselves and their own abilities and their own personhood. And so there were just some parallels I felt connected to Richard through. And so the lessons that he learned, I mean, among them, the one I mentioned earlier, this idea that you can't negative your way out of a situation. You have to positive your way out of a situation. You have to come up with what you actually want if you want to change what's going on. You can't just say, I don't want what this is. You need to replace what is with something else. You can't replace something with nothing. That's an incredibly powerful idea, that if you start to look at the situations that, you know, going back to the very beginning of our conversations, the situations in your own life that have just perpetuated, that you don't like, you don't feel good about them, they don't make you feel good, you wish they were different, but nothing has changed over years and years and years. You start to realize that maybe all you've ever thought is, I wish it wasn't like this. And you've never said, I wish it was like that instead. And then started to put your effort into making it like that, or realizing it's never going to be like that. So maybe it's time to just walk away from it. Right. So I think there's some really incredible ideas that Richard shares in his story that, I mean, and people have said as much in some of the reviews that there's potentially life-changing, sort of insights in what he has to share. That I know I definitely took some of those things away in the process of helping him tell the story, that have been valuable to me moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, that's such a powerful frame to think about, that you always want to focus on what you want. You don't want to focus on the opposite, because that's just going to create more of that. And at the end of the day, what grows is where we put our attention. And our attention is a superpower. This is something this is something a lot of high level entrepreneurs talk about, is think about the power of your attention in terms of what people are willing to pay for it. There's people spending so much money on advertising just to try to get your attention for a brief moment. Your attention is super valuable just as a asset to you. And people don't think of it like that. But where you put your attention is where your energy will go. And that's ultimately what will be created in your life. And it's not just some woo-woo hippie law of attraction stuff. It's very literal. It's like, no, literally, where you place your energy and your attention is what will grow. I mean, it's just simple, right? If you need to plant a garden, you have to put your energy on planting seeds and digging dirt. You know, it's very tactical. But people don't see it that way. They start to hear about this stuff and they're like, oh, you're just saying that whatever I think about will magically appear. Like, no, that's not how it works. You have to invest your energy, but where you place your attention is where your energy will go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your energy is like water, right? Whatever you water is what grows.
Exactly. Scott, this has been a great conversation, man. I got to wrap this up. But before we do, is there anything else that you want to promote or anything else that you want to share with us just before we wrap this up?
Well, if people haven't checked out Worth Defending, I mean, I'm biased, but I highly recommend it. It's a pretty incredible story. There's a bunch of information on worthdefendingbook.com, or you can just find the book on Amazon. It's available paperback, ebook, and audiobook. And then Chris Heauter and I, like I said, Chris Heauter and I are working on a book that should be out. We're hoping to put it out, sort of like mid 2024. So keep an eye out for that. And if people want to follow me on, social media, you can follow me at Enclave Jiu-Jitsu, and I'll be posting updates as, that book comes together. Also, enclavejujitsu.com. I do go around and teach seminars and classes. So if you want to get together, or if you're ever traveling through Northeast Ohio and you want to get together with me here, enclavejujitsu.com. And then all of my writing stuff, you can find out information about that is at scottburrauthor.com and on Facebook at Scott Burr Author. And so I got a bunch of different books besides Richard's, a couple of different really interesting memoirs that I've co-authored since Richard's, and then a couple of novels and a short story collection that people seem to like. So yeah, you can find me there. And if you do reach out, say hi. Love to hear from you.
Well, I'll put all those links down below in the show notes. So if you're interested in checking any of that stuff out, go click below and take a look at what Scott's doing. Man, that's awesome that you're working on a book with Chris Heauter. I've always wanted to have him on this show. So whenever you guys launch that, let me know, because I'd love to interview him. Would love to interview you again, and we can promote that launch. Because I'm excited to get into that book, man. But could you tell us just a little bit more about that, just to kind of finish up? Like, what's been some of your biggest takeaways from working on that book? Because I'm super interested to check it out when it launches.
So Chris is, as some of your listeners may know, Chris is obviously, he's a member of the Dirty Dozen. He's one of the first 12 non-Brazilian BJJ black belts. Got his black belt in 96. Was the first American to submit a Brazilian in a major competition at black belt level. But he's also, if your listeners have heard him on podcasts or ever caught a seminar with him or caught any of his videos, he is a fascinating, brilliant, broadly informed, intellectually omnivorous guy who, on top of that, has had an absolutely crazy life. And so that has been, personally, it's been a really interesting process of trying to corral all of his interests and insights and the varied, broad-reaching directions his attention and his interest goes into sort of one coherent whole, which of course it is, because he's one coherent whole, right? So the ways that we sort of solve that riddle, I think we came up with a pretty interesting solution to it. And I think the book turned into something really unique, really readable, really informative, really interesting. And I am just super duper psyched to share it with people. I mean, I can't wait for it to be out. And so, yeah, right now Chris is reading through the most recent draft I sent him, which, you know, is kind of like getting down near the end kind of draft. And I'm hoping that, you know, he gives it his pass, I'll give it another pass, and then hopefully we're going to be ready to start to move into the next phases. So I am very excited to share that with people. And, I'm hoping people will dig it and will check it out when it comes out. So we'll for sure keep you posted.
Yeah, let me know. I'd love to interview you guys and promote that when it's ready, because that sounds awesome. And I'll definitely be picking that up.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, man, of course. Well, Scott, you have a wonderful holiday season. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And yeah, again, guys, if you want to check out what Scott's working on, go check all the links below and buy one of his books. Check it out.
Appreciate it.